Hey, good morning. Welcome back to That'll Do Garage. Thanks for joining me. Today we have a fun project, something we get to do, not something we have to do. Let me show you. Well, I said good morning because it is. Today is Labor Day or President's Day or Airline Pilot's Day or something like that. I don't know. But I don't have to go to work, so I get to stay home and play with this beast. So jumped out of bed at the crack of 9:30 today to get started on this thing. This is the 1949 Farmall Cub, also partnered with International Harvester and McCormick at that time, so it's like triple badged. This has been in a different video and I haven't shown you guys much yet about it, but I'm really excited about this. I just picked it up this summer, a few months ago. So this is a 4-cylinder gas engine, 9 horsepower. So yeah, she's a speed demon. But it's in pretty good shape. It's been really fun so far. I got the mower deck on there. I got a snow plow for it as well. And my vision was that I would be able to use this thing to cut the grass, so I didn't have to walk with my little push mower. But so far that hasn't panned out. And there's been a few reasons for that. The first thing is I'm not even sure that it makes 9 horsepower, honestly. Like, it's a real struggle. If I have the mower all set up, the engine all warmed up, I have the full throttle, maximum horsepower, right? In the first gear, I go to let the clutch out, and if I'm not super careful, the engine dies like immediately. Anytime I go up a hill, the engine dies. Once it gets really warm, the engine dies. So it's been a struggle, but something's changed, and let me show you that. Can't do that with like a new car, right? Anywho, my friend John was telling me he's got a bunch of old tractors and a bunch of old stuff, and we were talking about fuel. And being the knucklehead that I am, I got this thing, filled it up with fresh fuel, but I used 87. And you know, because that's what I put in my car. It's the cheapest thing at the pump. And also, I didn't pay any attention to oxygenated or lead additives or ethanol, nothing like that. And so John and I were talking, and I was just saying, hey, do you think this is part of my problem? You know, the fact that I'm using 87 octane unleaded fuel on this thing. And John explained to me, number one, the whole leaded thing, you know, it's kind of about valve seats, and the lead was added to function almost as a lubricant to protect the valve seats. And you know, engines like this, they're doing okay. Like, they don't need that extra protection. So a lot of people these days don't even run lead additives anymore in stuff like this. But the real killer, or the real headache here, is the ethanol. And here in Minnesota, 87 octane I think is required to have 10% ethanol added, and this does a lot of things to the fuel, but long story short, it makes it unhappy. It absorbs water, it brings down the octane rating from 87 to something even lower. So we might really be struggling. Some of our struggles might be because of the fuel. And so I came in here the other day to drain out the 87 and put in non-oxygenated fuel, which is a big step. But then also I bumped up the octane, I think, to 91. So I got some 91 non-oxygenated, no ethanol added fuel. And I went to drain out the bad stuff and put in the good stuff, and I found some problems. Firstly, this bolt right here. I went to take this plug and this bolt off to drain the bowl, and when I put that bolt back in, sure enough, snapped in half. So then I had to take the carburetor off. I had to do an easy out situation, and I drilled a very precise hole through the middle of the broken off half, put an easy out in it, came right out then, which I was very happy with. It was quite easy. So that doesn't happen very often. I assume that would be a battle. And also that bolt, that stupid thing, it's not just a bolt, right? It's got a metered hole through the middle of it. And I couldn't find it available independently. Shocker, right? But I had to buy a whole carb kit, and you couldn't just buy a carb kit, you had to buy the comprehensive carb kit. So just to get that bolt This was like $74 with shipping, which is a little frustrating, but you know, whatever. So I have 99% of a comprehensive carb rebuild kit available if anybody wants it. I thought about taking this off and putting the whole carb rebuild kit in, but I know that's going to introduce more problems. So I'm going to leave it for now. But the big thing was, once I had this out and I had this out, the fuel was just barely trickling out. And I was trying to drain, you know, 6-8 gallons of fuel. So I was like, well, that's not going to work. Let me figure out why it's just barely trickling out. So I took it off up here, and sure enough, it was just barely trickling out of the fuel line. Like less than 10% of the volume of this thing. It was just almost dripping, you know. And I thought, that's not right. So I kept working up the path, and I found that glass bowl up there, and it looked okay. There was a little bit of sediment at the bottom, but not too bad. So I was puzzled because I could see the fuel coming in, and there was a little bit of sediment, but not a lot. And I thought, well, that's weird. So then what do you do when something feels weird, right? You keep going, you keep exploring. And eventually I took that fuel bowl apart, and I found out that up in the tippy top here, right up here, so the fuel's coming down out of the tank, and it filters down into this glass bowl, and then as it comes back up, it comes back out this line. But right where it was coming out of the tank and into this bowl, it was about 90% blocked with rust. It was just terrible. And so the fuel was hardly trickling into the bowl, and therefore it was hardly trickling into the line and hardly trickling into the carb. So I thought, well, I better get that rust out of there, and you know, just to be safe, I'll take the whole thing off. So it just evolved into this giant project, right? A couple hours later, I pushed this into the garage, and I had taken this whole top half off, and I took the tank off and hosed it out with water to get all the crud out of the bottom. And then I was all worried about it rusting because I just added a bunch of water. So then I had to I filled it right to the brim, I mean right to the top of the neck, with really nice clean fuel, and hopefully that will have pushed all the air out and then it can't rust. But so once I did all that, I put it all back together. Now it comes out of here, you know, like a Niagara Falls. I mean, this thing is full diameter is consumed with fluid flow, so that's good. And I'm really hoping that that will resolve, you know, some of these issues I was describing, like dying on hills and running out of power when you turn on the mower deck and all this stuff. It just didn't feel right, you know. Like, it seems like the system here, the horsepower and the gear reduction and the workload and everything, it wasn't a match. Like, why would you design a system that has to be at 99%? And as soon as you put any load on the mower, right, the engine dies. Like, that doesn't seem right. So I suspect that my 9 horsepower was maybe 5 horsepower or something. That's what I'm hoping. And so by giving this a good fuel supply and cleaning out all the carb and the stuff that was in there, I'm hoping I'll get back up to, you know, 7 or 8 or 9 horsepower. That'd be sweet. It's definitely been a little bit of a journey with this thing. Like, one day I couldn't get it to start because wasn't paying attention, and I left that up. You know, I parked it here and I left that up for like a week or two. So then rain got in here, and if you follow this down, dumps right in there. So this was all full of water, and I couldn't get it to start. So that day I ended up taking this intake / exhaust manifold off and just letting the water come out, drying everything out, put all that together, and then it started. I was lucky that day. I've also had kind of weird cranking. Like, it cranks forever. I mean, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes to get it started. The battery inevitably dies. So I got the battery charger on it already, but I'm hoping that's the fuel, crappy fuel combined with, you know, a 10% fuel supply. I'm hoping that that's related as well. So if we could get this thing to crank and start really well, and if we could get it to make twice the horsepower, and get it to not die on hills, and get it to not die when I engage the mower, you know, there's a chance that this would actually be functional to cut the grass. There's one more drawback I want to mention, which is that to have the blades on, you got to have the PTO switch engaged, which powers this pulley right here. which powers the deck, right? So to have this running, to have the deck running, you got to have the clutch out. And to have the clutch out, well, you're either sitting still in neutral, which doesn't cut the grass very well, or you have this in first gear, which means you are moving, right? So you can't have the deck running and just creep around a tree. You got to have the clutch out, and as I mentioned, the engine's got to be at full throttle. So you're doing like 7 miles an hour, and you're trying to like navigate around trees and not run over your bushes and stuff. So that's not great, right? Like, one of the things with the hydrostatic transmission is you can have the blades running and just slowly creep 1 mile an hour around the trees or whatever. Gives you a lot more control, and this doesn't have that. So my hope is, if the engine's making more power, I can idle it down, and then when I have it in first gear, I can go back to 50% throttle, and maybe it's only going 3 miles an hour, and then I would be able to go around trees without dying. So the last thing I need to do to this is, when I put it all back together on the other side, I had a tiny fuel leak still. Let me show you up here. It's leaking where the glass bowl meets the top of this housing. Well, obviously only when the fuel's on. So I'm going to take this back apart and just reseat this, and hopefully I can get that to seal. And then we're going to try to run this thing. And I should mention too, while I had it apart, I got to fix some stuff, right? Like the air filter. This is a oil based air filter, so that was not hooked up and it wasn't working properly. Fixed that. Also, this alternator was not the original alternator, and the bracket had it way out of line with the belt. It was like 3/4 of an inch in front of the belt, so the belt had to do this big dive back towards the engine. So I bent that bracket back with a pry bar. Oh, and the other thing that was bugging me was it had a pretty bad oil leak, and it was actually dripping down onto the deck, and it was getting on the floor, and I was worried about it. Turns out this bolt right here that secures this is the oil filter. This was just loose, so I gave it a good 1.5 rotations, and then I'm guessing that's gonna stop the oil leak. But there's a reason we're doing all this today. We're talking about all this stuff today. I want to actually use this to do some work. Let me show you. So way back here is like the back half of my property, and we only moved into this house like 6 months ago. So I'm just trying to figure out if I can use this property, what I can use it for, you know, how do I want to make use of it. But it's beautiful back here, right? So my property goes like to those trees over there and those trees over there in the distance. It's about 1 acre back here, and we have all this 5-foot tall grass, which is, you know, pretty and nice ecosystem and all that stuff. But also I want to use this space. I might put a fire pit type patio thing out here. I might start growing something, I don't know. So I want to mow this grass, and I've been using my little push mower to make the path that you see here. And let me tell you, that's pretty exhausting. You go like 6 inches at a time. So I want to get that tractor running. I'm hoping it makes about twice the horsepowers, and then I want to mow some of this down and you know, just see what's back here, like beautiful piles of concrete. Fuel leaking up here anymore. However, what the heck is up with that? Nothing ever goes smoothly, you know, especially on old tractors. I don't even know what that is. When I had it all apart, I looked at that, and I think it's like a casting plug and I think there's like a rubber thing on the inside, but I'm not really sure. So I'm gonna let this drain out. I shut the fuel off again, and then I guess we'll have to take that off and see what's going on. So that was pretty weird. As soon as I took this off, like a cup of fluid came out. I assume it's gas. And now this little rubber thing stopped leaking. But that didn't start until I turned on the gas. So it must have been like running into the bowl, and for some reason the float and the needle was not turning it off, or maybe it's bypassing the float and the needle somehow, and it was getting into here, which filled this up. But now when I take this off, it stops. Oh yeah, I did turn off the fuel, so maybe let me see if I turn the fuel back on, what's gonna happen then. How do I get this booger? Okay, I'm gonna turn the fuel back on. Let's just see what kind of tomfoolery we get into now. Yep, immediately pouring fuel out again. Holy moly, out of the... Where's that coming from? Oh man, I'm just shaking my head so hard. This is exactly why these things are so much work, right? Like, I thought I had this all nailed down. Thought I knew what was going on. Who would have thought that turning on the fuel would result in a geyser coming out of the frickin' throttle? What is up with that? Where's it even coming from? Definitely coming out of that hole up on the top there. And judging by the volume, there's no way it's supposed to be doing that. Good thing I got the comprehensive carb rebuild kit. This is the tricky thing with carburetors and why they're so daunting. Like, obviously there's a passage there, but what the heck is it for? What's it supposed to be doing? Why is it shooting a geyser of fuel? And what in all this wizardry do I need to replace or adjust or fix or bend or unbend to make that not happen? I don't know. So I guess what I'll do, for Pete's sakes, I'm tempted to take it apart here, because then I can keep flowing fuel through here and figure out why that's happening. But if I take it apart, if I take it off and I take it apart on the bench, then maybe I can logic it out. You know, there's passage up there, so I just got to figure out where does this passage go in the carburetor, and what's happening or not happening, you know, to mess with the fuel like that. I tell my friend John about these antics, and I tell him what happened and what I thought was going to happen, and then what happened, and this thing blew up, and he just laughs at me and he says, "Welcome to antique tractor ownership. Grass, you live to grow another day." Well, here we go. Wish me luck. I can just feel I'm on the very edge of a rabbit hole, and if I go 1 inch farther, we are in this rabbit hole, my friends. Anyway, this is the bolt that broke I was talking about before. You can kind of see it's got a hole. It had a hole, much more precise hole, drilled through the middle. So it was related to fuel metering. And this is what necessitated this whole kit, which I got from a tractor parts vendor online. So there's lots of stuff in there. Who knows if it's accurate, but I think my plan then, the fuel's coming out of that hole up above the throttle plate, or the choke plate, I guess that is, kind of both, choke. So that's my first mission. Figure out how to get to that hole. I'm gonna have to separate the fuel bowl along this line here and start trying to trace that passage to see where it goes, and you know what isn't shutting off the fuel that should be. But my memory goes back to the other video that I'll post, or have posted, where I got this thing running for the first time, and I took this, I couldn't get it to start, just crank, 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 crank. It would not fire. And the same thing happened. I took this air cleaner tube off and a bunch of liquid came out, and I assumed it was gas or maybe water, I don't know, but I didn't think much about it, and just carried on. You know, I figured I'll just get it started and figure that out later. And the way the fuel was gushing out up here, I bet you it's been doing that ever since I picked it up, but because we had such slow fuel delivery with the rust in the fuel bowl, it probably wasn't a huge issue. And that also might be part of the reason why the thing would hardly stay running. So I mean, it's a good thing we're fixing this, but it's also, like I said, stuff's gonna break, stuff's gonna strip out, stuff's gonna be wrong. It might take me 6 months to put this back together. Okay, a couple things to note right away. There's some white goo down here, not sure what that's about. I assume that's from water, maybe. It's kind of collecting. It's a little weird. Hasn't been that long since I opened this, so I'm not sure how that got in there. Also, so this is our port where fuel is gushing out, right? Goes right into the choke plate there. So if you follow the yellow brick road, coming over here, and there's something right there. It's definitely brass. I don't know if there's supposed to be something there and it's missing. Really hard to tell. So let me look at the bottom here. Let's see where we're at on the top piece. So this would be, let's see, this path right here, right? Yeah, this is this. So there's actually fuel flowing right there. It's possible that it's supposed to be, you know, for air, not fuel, but let's see if we can get this gasket off and see what's under here. Okay, so when I shoot WD right here into that tiny threaded hole, it comes out here, the hole right next to it, and it comes out here. So, no idea. What does that mean? Anybody got any bright ideas? I don't know. I'm just clueless right now. Okay, so to further complicate things, it's all foamy now, but it's also coming out down here in that bolt I broke earlier. And this is a metered bolt. It has a precise hole. So if I'm not crazy, this thing, the bowl, fills with fuel, right? Duh. Okay, we're good that far. Now, what is it? I don't even know. Like, that's all I got so far. I hope you guys aren't judging me for not knowing what the heck I'm talking about. There's not a lot of carburetors laying around anymore, right? Everything's newfangled computer controlled fuel injection. So I'm looking around. This is the bottom half, right? And this is the top half. And I got this tube runs up into the top half, and here's an adjustable needle. So I think this is related to the mixture at idle, right? So if I wanted to richen it up or lean it out, I would adjust this. And maybe it's not at idle, maybe it's at full throttle, I don't know. But anyway, so I think this is related to that, given the proximity, right? Like that tube kind of lines up where the seed of that needle would be. So let's see if I flip this thing over. Yeah. See, kind of, sort of. So I think as I adjust this, you know, that changes how much fuel gets sucked up, because this tube goes in this hole. So this would be like a straw then. Engine vacuum sucks a little fuel up, and way up here inside, it's super difficult to see, I'm sorry, I can barely see it right here in person. Way up in here are two tiny holes, tiny, like I can't even get my pick into them, and I think that's where the fuel dribbles in. So one of these is probably like idle bypass or something, and the other one is like the main jet. No, that's probably this. So that would let fuel come in right here. Okay, so that makes sense. So this might be like a bypass thing then, you know, because I think what they do is they have like a low volume, low flow circuit for, let's say, idle, and then they have a high volume circuit for like full throttle. And so one passage is going to be really small and the other one has a bigger capacity. So this might be like the main jet, and that's where the bulk of the fuel will come from. But when you throttle down and idle, it's possible that this straw, I'm just making this up, right? Play along. This straw sucks a little bit of fuel up through here and dribbles it into the intake right here. Just enough to keep the engine running, right? The throttle's closed. It's just idling. So that might be what's happening. Just guessing, like I said. But man, my brain. So if that's true, I have fuel coming out right here, which is coming through this passage. This port connects to this main jet and ultimately connects down here, way at the bottom of the bowl. So shouldn't this just be, well, what is this for then? What needs to go from here to here? Air or fuel? I don't understand. Okay, current theory. I did figure out that this straw is connected to those tiny holes inside here. I assume this meters that, but I don't know. And that straw goes in this hole. So I think what's supposed to happen, remember engine vacuum is sucking on the fuel in the fuel bowl. So I'm guessing that this is supposed to suck a little bit of air from over here by the choke plate. Now where is that in relation to the choke? Is it upstream? Yes. So if you close the choke, in general, you know, most of the air being fed to the engine is cut off when the choke is closed. But that hole is still visible, right? So what that becomes then is when the choke is closed, this is a controlled air amount. So air should be flowing down here. When the choke is closed, air should be flowing down here and going into this passage, which connects ultimately down here at the bottom, that goes down, connects, come back up through this straw, which then comes out up here at those tiny holes. And so this bolt, maybe just that bolt, that when the choke is closed, this should be flowing air into here, and it's going to suck a little bit of fuel through this port down here in the bowl, and then it's going to come up through this hole metered by this bolt and come out these holes into the engine. And that's how it should run when the choke is closed. And then, well, probably all the time, right? Even when the choke is open, it's still going to be sucking air, but less so. So I think what we have then is this is an air passage, and that's fine, but it shouldn't have fuel there. And so what I think, I'm guessing, but what I think is that somehow our bowl gasket here was leaking, and it was letting fuel go from this side through the gasket into this air passage. That's my guess. I'm just guessing. So if that's true, putting a new bowl gasket in there should fix this. But since I'm here, I'm going to open the kit. I'm going to find out what parts I have, what's identical, and then I'll just put a few key new parts in here. Gosh, I know that there's people who know about carburetors and they're just screaming at me right now. Okay, so I learned my lesson. Bear with me. I opened the kit to start assessing what parts I had, and I found this beautiful piece of paper, which makes the whole kit worth it. This very detailed instructions on identification and disassembly and reassembly, and even how to set things up so that it runs properly. So I banged my head against the wall, strained my intellectual capacity to the extreme, and I still got nothing figured out. And all the answers were right here in the piece of paper. I just needed to look. So I think this is the antique tractor gods teaching me a lesson, right? Earlier in this video, I was poo-pooing the comprehensive kit and saying, no, I'm just going to take the one bolt out. I'm not going to do the whole kit. You can't treat tractors like that, right? Like 110% of the time, you got to do everything right. No corners can be cut. You make no plans. You don't assume the tractor's ever going to work. We are at the tractor's mercy, right? If it wants to run, it'll run. If it doesn't, there's nothing in the universe you can do to get it to run. So I learned my lesson, hopefully. Well, I think that's where we're gonna leave the video for now. Next thing I'm gonna do is completely disassemble that carburetor, clean everything, put all the new parts in, actually follow the setup instructions. I don't know, crazy idea, right? And then I should be able to put it back on, and maybe then I will have made good on my ignorance and the tractor gods will allow it to start. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching.